If you've ever had the misfortune of dealing with an HOA, then you already know they can sometimes act like they own your entire life. From telling you what color you can paint your mailbox, to complaining about the wrong shade of green on your lawn, these people thrive on control. Now, don't get me wrong. I understand the idea behind an HOA is supposed to be about maintaining community standards, but in practice, many of these boards are nothing more than self-appointed tyrants with too much free time. That's the exact situation my family found ourselves in. My wife and I had lived in this neighborhood for over a decade. It wasn't some gated mansion community, just a suburban development where a handful of power-hungry HOA board members decided to treat their little committee like it was the Supreme Court. At first, their rules didn't really bother me. I kept the grass trimmed, paid the dues, and ignored the petty letters about leaving the garbage bins out too long. But over time, it became clear that some of the board members, especially one woman named Karen, weren't satisfied with simply running the HOA. They wanted to control people. Karen was the type who would walk around the neighborhood at odd hours with a clipboard, snapping photos of people's homes, their cars, and even their kids. She called it keeping records, but it was obvious she just enjoyed sticking her nose where it didn't belong. We tried to avoid her as much as possible, but one night, things escalated in a way I could never have predicted. The setting, a normal weekend, turns strange. My son, Adam, had just turned 16. Like any teenager, he loved having his friends over, playing video games late into the night, and feeling like he had some independence. My wife and I trusted him. He's a good kid, respectful, and far more responsible than Karen, or the HOA ever gave him credit for. That weekend, Adam had told us he wanted to invite a couple of friends over. My wife and I were heading out of town for the evening, but we weren't worried. Adam wasn't the type to throw wild parties, and our neighbor, a retired police officer, kept an eye on the street anyway. But what we didn't know at the time was that Adam's friends weren't just his usual school buddies. You see, our family has an interesting connection. My brother, Adam's uncle, served in the Navy for over 2 decades. He spent years in Special Forces and had close ties with several former Navy SEALs who had since retired. These guys were like family to us. They'd visit occasionally, share stories, and treat Adam like their own nephew. So that weekend, when Adam mentioned having people over, what he didn't clarify was that some of his visitors would include actual Navy SEALs, not just ordinary teenagers. Karen notices something. Around 8 o'clock that night, 2 large SUVs pulled up to our driveway. Out stepped 4 men, all of them built like they'd been carved out of stone, dressed casually, but with an unmistakable aura of authority. They weren't in uniform, of course, but you could just tell, these were military guys. Now, to any normal neighbor, this wouldn't have been alarming. Maybe you'd think we had some family friends visiting. But to Karen, this was the equivalent of spotting enemy combatants moving into her neighborhood. She immediately grabbed her phone and started recording. Later, I learned she even sent clips of these men walking up to my house to the rest of the HOA board, with dramatic captions like, "Suspicious individuals spotted at the Johnson residence. Possibly gang-related activity. We need to contact authorities ASAP." Keep in mind, these men were Navy SEALs. They'd risked their lives overseas for years, but to Karen, they were nothing more than suspicious strangers invading her pristine little cul-de-sac. Adam and the SEALs inside the house. Inside, Adam couldn't have been happier. The SEALs treated him like a little brother, teaching him handshakes, telling him wild but hilarious stories, nothing classified, of course, and just hanging out like family. To Adam, it was one of the best nights of his teenage life. But outside, Karen was building her case. She had convinced herself something sinister was happening. She claimed she saw menacing men sneaking into the house. She texted half the neighborhood. And finally, she did what Karen always does when she feels the need for drama. She called the cops. The police arrive. It was about 9:30 p.m. when the flashing red and blue lights hit our driveway. Adam later told me his stomach dropped when he saw 2 squad cars pull up. At first, he thought maybe something had happened in the neighborhood. But then the officers got out, hands near their holsters, and approached our door with serious expressions. The SEALs inside immediately noticed the commotion. Years of training had made them hyper-aware of their surroundings, and when Adam nervously explained that the HOA had been known to harass us, they understood exactly what was happening. "Don't worry, kid," one of them said calmly. "We'll handle this." Karen runs to the scene. Before the police could even knock, Karen appeared out of the shadows like she'd been waiting for her big moment. Clipboard in hand, phone still recording, she rushed up to the officers. "Officers," she exclaimed dramatically. "I need you to know there are dangerous men inside that house. They're not supposed to be here, and that boy is unsupervised. They could be criminals, gang members, who knows what." Adam, peeking from the window, told me later that the SEALs actually laughed when they overheard her. To them, the idea that they were being mistaken for gang members was almost comical. But they stayed calm. One of the SEALs turned to Adam and said, "All right, we'll let them know the truth. Just stay cool." The first clash. When the officers knocked, the SEALs didn't hesitate. They opened the door politely, introduced themselves by name, and even explained their background. Of course, cops are trained to be cautious, but when one of the men casually mentioned he was a retired SEAL with 20 years of service, the officer's demeanor immediately shifted. Respect. That's what these guys commanded. Meanwhile, Karen was losing it. She was practically shouting from the driveway, insisting the officers arrest them, demanding proof, and trying to make it seem like the entire neighborhood was in danger. But the officers weren't buying it. They could read the situation. They saw Adam, safe, comfortable, clearly not in distress. They saw the SEALs, calm, respectful, not threatening at all. Karen, however, wasn't about to give up so easily. She had no idea that her obsession with control was about to backfire in the most humiliating way possible. The scene in front of our house looked like something out of a reality show: flashing lights, nosy neighbors peeking out from behind curtains, police officers standing at the door, and Karen pacing around like she was the director of the entire production. Adam later told me he was torn between being embarrassed and amused. On one hand, the whole street now thought something major was happening at our house. On the other, watching Karen dig her own grave while arguing with seasoned military veterans was something he knew he'd never forget. Karen's version of events. The officers were calm and professional, but Karen wasn't about to let them handle things their way. She kept interrupting, waving her arms like she was the star witness in some high-profile case. "I saw them, officers," she cried, pointing dramatically at the SEALs. They arrived in dark vehicles, SUVs, no less, clearly trying to avoid attention. They walked straight into the house where that boy is home alone. Do you really think that's normal? Look at them. Tattoos, muscles, they look like trouble. You have to do something before it's too late. One of the SEALs, a tall man named Ray, crossed his arms and raised an eyebrow. He said in a voice that carried authority without even trying, "We're here visiting family. Nothing more, nothing less." But Karen wasn't having it. "Family? Don't give me that. I know everyone in this neighborhood, and none of you live here. You're trespassing. You're intimidating. And this is a quiet, safe community. We don't need your kind here." The words, "your kind," didn't sit well with anyone, especially not the officers. You could see one of them glance at her like she'd just crossed a line. The SEALs stepped forward. At this point, another SEAL, Mike, pulled out his wallet and calmly handed over his retired military ID. "Officer," he said evenly, "we served this country. We've put our lives on the line more times than I can count. We're here to spend time with our buddy's nephew. That's it. No trouble, no nonsense." The officers studied the ID, nodded, and even said, "Thank you for your service." That was the moment everything shifted, at least for the police. They knew who they were dealing with. But Karen. She was still on her crusade. "Don't fall for it," she shrieked. "Anyone can print out a fake card these days. You have no idea who these people really are. For all we know, they could be mercenaries or ex-cons trying to set up some kind of gang operation. Look at those vehicles. Look at their size. Nobody that big and scary is just here for family night." Adam told me later that he almost burst out laughing at that one. To him, these men were uncles, role models, heroes. But to Karen, they were apparently some kind of criminal syndicate. The cops turned to Adam. The officers, realizing Karen wasn't going to shut up, decided to talk directly to Adam. They gently asked him if he felt safe, if he knew the men, and if his parents were aware they were visiting. "Yes, sir," Adam replied confidently. "These guys are my uncle's friends. They've been part of my life since I was a kid. My parents know them and trust them. Honestly, they are probably the safest people you could ever meet." The officers nodded. His tone and body language said it all. He wasn't scared, he wasn't being pressured, and he clearly knew who they were. That should have been the end of it. But Karen just couldn't accept being wrong. Karen pushes too far. Karen marched right up to the officers and demanded, "You need to remove them immediately. I don't care what the boy says, he's a minor, and minors can't make decisions like this. I'm telling you, they are dangerous. If you don't do something, I'll call the county sheriff myself and escalate this matter." The SEALs shared a look, half amusement, half disbelief. Ray finally spoke up, his patience wearing thin. He said firmly, "You're out of line. You've called the police on us for no reason, accused us of crimes without evidence, and are now trying to take over a situation that doesn't concern you. You need to back off." But instead of backing off, Karen puffed out her chest like she was some kind of authority figure. "Excuse me. I'm on the HOA board. I have a responsibility to protect this community. If that means keeping out suspicious outsiders, then that's what I'll do. You don't belong here, and I won't rest until you're gone." That was the moment one of the officers finally snapped. The officer calls her out. The officer said sternly, "This is a police matter, not an HOA issue. These men have identified themselves, the homeowner's son has confirmed he knows them, and there is no evidence of a crime. At this point, you are bordering on filing a false report. I suggest you step aside and let us handle it." You could practically see Karen's jaw hit the floor. She wasn't used to being talked to like that, especially not by an authority figure who wasn't bending to her will. Still, she tried one last desperate attempt. But, they're frightening the neighbors. Look at them. People are scared." The officer shook his head. "The only person who seems scared is you. And frankly, you're the only one causing a disturbance right now. The neighborhood watches." By this point, several neighbors had gathered outside to watch. Some leaned against their fences, others peeked from driveways, and a few even had their phones out recording the drama. Whispers spread through the crowd. "Those are Navy SEALs. No way. Karen really messed up this time. Unbelievable. She called the cops on veterans." Adam said he'll never forget the way the SEALs carried themselves. Calm, collected, respectful, completely opposite of Karen, who looked like a storm ready to explode. Karen's embarrassing moment. And then, the cherry on top, one of the seals, Mike, casually said loud enough for everyone to hear, "While you were busy accusing us of being criminals, did it ever occur to you to thank us for our service?" The crowd chuckled. Some even clapped. Karen's face turned bright red, but instead of apologizing, she just huffed, turned on her heel, and stormed off toward her house. The officers, clearly tired of her antics, let her go, but made it clear they were done listening to her. They shook hands with the seals, gave Adam a reassuring nod, and then left without further incident. But the story wasn't over, not by a long shot. Because Karen wasn't the type to let things go. If anything, being embarrassed in front of the neighborhood only fueled her determination to win. And as Adam would soon find out, her next move would drag the entire HOA into the mess. If the story had ended the night the police left, that would have been satisfying enough. The seals had been vindicated, Adam's safety wasn't in question, and Karen had made herself look like a fool in front of the entire neighborhood. But if you know anything about HOA busybodies, especially one like Karen, you know humiliation doesn't make them stop. It just makes them dig in deeper. And true to form, Karen was already planning her next move. Karen calls an emergency HOA meeting. 2 days later, flyers started showing up in everyone's mailboxes. Printed in bold letters at the top were the words, "Emergency HOA meeting. Safety concerns in our neighborhood." According to the notice, the meeting was scheduled for that weekend in the community clubhouse. The language on the flyer made it sound like the neighborhood was under siege. Suspicious men entering homes without permission. Police involvement. Safety of our children at risk. It was obvious to anyone with common sense who had written it. Karen wanted revenge, and she was determined to make the seals, and by extension, my family, look like criminals. Adam showed me the flyer when I got home, and I'll admit, my blood boiled. My wife and I had been nothing but respectful members of the community, paying dues, keeping our house in shape, and never causing trouble. But now, because Karen had a vendetta, our son was being dragged into neighborhood gossip. The seals, however, had a different reaction. When my brother called to tell them what was happening, they actually laughed. Typical HOA nonsense, Ray chuckled. "Don't worry. We'll be at that meeting. If she wants to put on a show, we'll give her an audience." The HOA meeting begins. That Saturday evening, the community clubhouse was packed. It wasn't often the HOA called an emergency meeting, so naturally, almost every resident showed up. Karen sat at the front table with her clipboard, acting like the queen of the neighborhood. The other board members sat beside her, some looking uncomfortable, others clearly amused. As soon as the meeting started, Karen wasted no time launching into her speech. "Neighbors," she began dramatically, "our community has always prided itself on being safe, orderly, and family-friendly. But recently, that safety has been jeopardized. Unfamiliar men, dangerous-looking men, were spotted entering the Johnson residence. The police had to be called. And while they may have chosen to downplay the situation, it's clear we are under threat." She paused for effect, scanning the room as if expecting gasps of horror. Instead, most people just looked skeptical. The seals enter. Right on cue, the doors at the back of the clubhouse opened, and in walked Ray, Mike, and 2 other seals. They weren't dressed in military uniforms, just jeans and t-shirts, but their presence commanded instant attention. Heads turned. Conversations hushed. Karen froze mid-sentence, her face draining of color. "Evening, everyone," Ray said calmly as they walked to the front. "Sorry to interrupt, but since our names are being thrown around, we figured we'd attend and clear up any confusion." The room buzzed with whispers. Some neighbors leaned forward eagerly, while others sat back, arms crossed, waiting for fireworks. The truth comes out. Ray introduced himself and the other men, explaining their background in the Navy SEALs, their connection to my brother, and their relationship with Adam. He spoke plainly, respectfully, and with undeniable authority. We're not strangers. We're family friends. We've known Adam since he was little, and we came to spend time with him while his parents were away. There was no threat, no danger, and certainly no crime. Mike added, and for the record, the police officers who responded already confirmed that. The only person who thought otherwise was this woman here. He nodded toward Karen. All eyes turned to her. She squirmed in her seat, clutching her clipboard like a shield. Karen tried to defend herself. I was only doing my duty. This community counts on me to keep it safe. Anyone could have mistaken you for criminals. That line drew laughter from the back of the room. One neighbor muttered loud enough for others to hear, criminals. They look like they could stop criminals. The neighbors speak up. One by one, neighbors started chiming in, not to support Karen, but to call her out. Karen, you always blow things out of proportion. You embarrassed the Johnsons and wasted police resources. Honestly, I feel safer knowing men like this are visiting our neighborhood. Karen's face turned red, but she refused to back down. You don't understand. Once we let people like this just wander around, what's next? What if they bring others? What if? Ray cut her off, his voice steady but firm. With all due respect, we didn't wander around. We drove in, visited family, and left. We didn't break a single law. You created danger by calling the police on a false pretense. If that call had escalated differently, you could have put officers and civilians in harm's way. The room went dead quiet. Everyone understood the weight of his words. The board's decision. Finally, the HOA president, who until then had stayed quiet, spoke up. He wasn't exactly known for challenging Karen, but even he couldn't ignore how bad she looked. Karen, he said carefully, I think it's clear that your concerns were exaggerated. The police closed the case. These men are respected veterans. Unless there's actual evidence of wrongdoing, this matter is closed. Karen's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. She wasn't used to being dismissed, especially not in front of the entire neighborhood. But the SEALs weren't finished. A lesson in respect. Mike leaned forward slightly, his tone calm but pointed. We've served in places where real threats exist. We've faced people who actually wanted to harm innocent lives. What happened here wasn't a threat, it was an overreaction. You need to think about the consequences of your actions before you drag innocent families and law enforcement into unnecessary conflict. The message was clear. And judging by the uncomfortable silence in the room, everyone felt it, even if it wasn't directed at them. Karen tried to save face, muttering something about just trying to do the right thing, but the damage was done. Her credibility had taken a hit. Neighbors were laughing at her instead of rallying behind her. The HOA board was tired of her antics. And the SEALs. They turned the entire situation on its head without raising their voices or losing their composure. Karen plots again. Of course, Karen being Karen, she didn't let it go. As the meeting ended and people filed out, she was already whispering to a couple of her closest allies, vowing that this wasn't over. But what she didn't realize was that her obsession was only digging her deeper into trouble. Because the next time she crossed the line, she wouldn't just be dealing with annoyed neighbors or embarrassed board members. She'd be dealing with consequences she never saw coming. After the HOA meeting, Karen's reputation was in shambles. For once, the neighbors had seen her for what she really was, a bully with a clipboard. You'd think the embarrassment of being laughed at would have taught her a lesson, but Karen wasn't wired that way. If anything, the humiliation fueled her determination to win. She didn't just want the seals gone. She wanted my family gone. Karen's final push. A week after the meeting, we started receiving HOA violation notices in the mail. First, it was about the length of our grass, even though we had just mowed it. Then it was about unauthorized visitors. Then about excessive vehicles parked in the driveway. It was obvious what was happening. Karen was weaponizing the HOA system against us. And while the other board members weren't enthusiastic about backing her up, she pushed hard enough that the letters kept coming. One evening, Adam showed me a particularly ridiculous one. Your household has become a repeated source of disruption to the peace of the community. Continued disregard for HOA standards will result in fines and further action. Adam rolled his eyes. Dad, she's obsessed. What's she gonna do, fine us for breathing? I was ready to fight the HOA in court if necessary, but the seals had another idea. The seals pay Karen a visit. One Saturday morning, while Karen was outside patrolling the street with her phone camera, Ray and Mike walked over. They weren't aggressive. They weren't confrontational. But their presence alone was enough to make Karen freeze. Ray began, we need to talk. Karen immediately raised her phone like a shield. I'm recording this for my safety. You have no right to come near me. Ray didn't flinch. That's fine. Record all you want. Just make sure you get this on video, you've crossed a line. Harassing families, filing false reports, and abusing your position on the HOA board isn't just petty, it's dangerous. You put police officers at risk. You put this kid, he nodded toward Adam, who had stepped outside, at risk. That needs to stop now. Karen sputtered, trying to find words. I was protecting the neighborhood. Mike leaned in slightly, not threatening, but firm. No. You were protecting your ego. And if you keep this up, you won't just be embarrassing yourself. You'll be dealing with real consequences. With that, they walked away, leaving Karen standing in her driveway, red-faced and trembling. The tipping point. Of course, Karen being Karen, she didn't take the warning seriously. Instead, she doubled down. A few nights later, she actually called the cops again, claiming there was suspicious activity at our house. But this time, it backfired spectacularly. When the officers arrived, they were the same ones from before. They immediately recognized our home, saw Adam safe, and realized Karen was abusing 911. After confirming nothing was wrong, one officer finally told her flat out. This is the second false report you've filed in as many weeks. If this continues, you could be charged with misuse of emergency services. Do you understand? Karen tried to argue, but the officer cut her off. This isn't an HOA matter. This is law enforcement. And if you keep wasting our time, you'll be the one in legal trouble. For once, Karen didn't have a comeback. The neighborhood turns on her. Word spread quickly about what happened. By the next HOA meeting, the board was fed up. Multiple neighbors stood up to complain, not about us, but about her. She's harassing families. She's abusing her position. She's wasting police time and making us all look bad. Finally, the HOA president announced that Karen would be formally censured. She wouldn't be removed from the board entirely, yet, but her influence was gone. She no longer had the power to unilaterally send violation notices. And without the board backing her, she was just another cranky neighbor with no real authority. The seals' parting words. Before the meeting ended, the seals, who had attended just in case, stood up one last time. Ray spoke directly to the room. Look, we didn't come here to cause drama. We came here to visit family. We don't hold grudges, but we do expect respect, not just for us, but for Adam, for his parents, and for every neighbor here who just wants to live in peace. Communities aren't built on control. They are built on trust. Maybe this neighborhood could use more of that. The room erupted in applause. Even neighbors who usually kept quiet nodded in agreement. Karen, meanwhile, sat stone-faced, staring down at her clipboard like a child who'd been scolded in front of the class. Peace at last. After that night, things finally quieted down. Karen still gave us dirty looks when she walked by, but she stopped harassing Adam. The violation notices stopped. The cops never showed up at our house again. Most importantly, Adam felt safe. He even told me later, "Dad, that was the first time I realized how much respect those guys really get." Karen tried everything, but the truth always won. The seals eventually left, but not before grilling steaks in our backyard, laughing with Adam, and leaving him with stories he'll carry for the rest of his life. Karen's legacy. Karen didn't change, of course. People like her rarely do. But after everything that happened, she lost the one thing she valued most, control. The neighbors no longer saw her as the protector of the community. They saw her as the busybody who embarrassed herself in front of Navy SEALs and got called out by the cops. Her reign of terror with the HOA clipboard was effectively over. Closing thoughts. Looking back, I can't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. A power-hungry HOA Karen thought she could intimidate my teenage son, only to end up picking a fight with decorated veterans who had faced dangers she couldn't even imagine. She wanted to control the situation. Instead, she exposed herself as the problem. And in the end, the only danger to the neighborhood wasn't the SEALs. It was Karen, and the only thing she succeeded in destroying was her own reputation.